Welcome to Fighting on Film, the podcast about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to cover it. I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
I'm Robbie of RA Military History.
Welcome everyone to the first episode. And what are we going to be discussing today, Robbie?
Well, we are going to be discussing the 1946 classic that is Theirs is the Glory, which is a forgotten gem, and it's all about those glorious Red Devils.
Just to give an overview of what the film actually is about and how it flows, it's basically, as Hurst himself says, it's a day-by-day telling of the battle. So it looks at specifically the men of 1st Airborne Division, and especially the men in Arnhem and Oosterbeek. We don't see any American elements, any of the other elements, 30 Corps, etc. They're mentioned, but we don't see them on screen. And it premiered on the second anniversary of the battle on the 17th of September 1946. It's not a normal war film by any stretch of the mind, is it?
No, it's really not.
A number of special characteristics about it. One, it was filmed literally weeks and months after the end of the war.
Yeah.
And it features a cast which is almost entirely made up of people that were actually at the battle.
There isn't really a cast. There's not any names.
Mm.
The only name I thought of when I was doing when I was rewatching the movie yesterday, the only name you could make a case for is Stanley Maxted, because after this he has a film career, but at the time he wasn't an actor. It's kind of refreshing, really, because when you watch it, when I watch Saving Private Ryan, I know I'm watching Tom Hanks. I know I'm watching
Tom Sizemore,
yeah. I know I'm seeing actors.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Already I'm sort of, my disbelief has gone.
Yeah, it does sort of remove you from the moment.
You think, what's Forrest Gump doing with the Thompson? Almost. You know what I mean, though?
Yeah.
In this movie, you don't know who it is. You don't know who's that. And it really kind of grips you and pulls you in at points. I feel that anyway.
I know, I agree. I think the element that they aren't professional actors and you don't know any of them by name. For me, I saw the film when I was researching for my book on the PIAT.
Nice plug. Available at all good bookshops.
all good bookstores. Signed copies. So I basically discovered the film when I was doing the research for the book. I knew that they were all men that had been at the battle.
Yeah. When
I sat down to watch it, I was sat there with my historian's mind, like my historian's cap on, thinking, "Oh, these men were actually at the battle. How did they feel doing this again? Are they the men that they're portraying? Are they men that were actually in this position doing this act, etc., etc., etc." While I went into it, obviously, I wasn't removed by any big name actors.
Yeah.
Like John Mills could have been in this film.
Yeah, easily.
Like
Stanley Baker, he wouldn't have been out of place.
Yeah. So obviously, instead of that, I was sat watching it thinking, these men were really there. So there was another kind of disconnect, but it doesn't impact the watching of the film.
Not at all.
I think it adds a real layer of interest.
It's such a unique movie in itself that it sort of defies the genre in a way. Mm-hmm. I can't think of the top of my head, or having seen many, many war films, anything that sort of comes close to replicating the actual events as closely as this film does. I mean, even from its production to its story to its actual showing, it's sort of its shots and things.
Yeah,
it's very unique in that regard.
Yeah, there's a number of unique aspects to it in that it includes footage that was filmed during the battle.
Yeah,
it includes footage which was filmed on the actual locations of the battle, not only with the men that were involved in the fighting, but also it's filmed on the ground where the battle took place.
It's more of a documentary. I always say, I always feel that you're watching. You might as well be watching real time footage. It's very odd. It's almost like these days it'd be like, it's like a live stream.
Yeah, no, yeah, I can definitely see.
We hear that historians bang on about walking the ground. Well, this film is like that.
It's literally a war walk.
Yeah, it might as well be. Richard Holmes would absolutely dig it.
Of course, yeah. I hope he saw it. He must have seen it. So, who directed the film, Robbie?
Oh, it's Brian Desmond Hurst.
Yes, we've been doing a fair bit of digging about Brian Desmond Hurst recently, haven't we, for this podcast? And obviously did your video on your channel about the film a month or so ago.
Yeah, and he's a bit of a dude. You know, he's produced a lot more military movies than you might think. He produces Miss Grant Goes to the Door in 1940 as an anti-invasion piece. Then he goes on to make a movie about American troops in Ireland. And then after the war, obviously he makes Theirs Is the Glory, but he also makes Malta Story.
Yeah, Malta Story is infinitely better known than Theirs Is, definitely.
Massively.
So in preparation for discussing the film, I picked up a copy of a book about the film written by, I believe it's the nephew of Brian Desmond Hurst. It's Theirs Is the Glory, Arnhem, Hurst and Conflict on Film by David Truesdale and Alan Esler Smith. And in the book, they have an excerpt from Hurst's memoirs, and he explains how the film came about, because it's quite a special concept, and it seems to have evolved fairly organically. So this excerpt from the book, it says, the head of Garmont News, which was like a newsreel company at the time, came to me and soon after the war ended and asked me if I'd like to make a film about the Arnhem drop. When I heard that the film company proposed to do with the story, basically using shots and a few jokes. Yeah. So it'd be stock footage from the newsreels with a voiceover. He says, I said to myself, this is not on. It was also suggested to me by the producer of the Rank organization that we could use one of the most popular stars of the day. I said, no, he doesn't know one end of a rifle to the other.
Wow.
He goes, yeah.
Bold filmmaking for the time, at least.
Yeah, well, to turn down a leading man.
Yeah.
That's a bold move.
Yeah.
So he continues, there was nobody who appeared in the film, officer or soldier, who had not fought at Arnhem. It is a true documentary reconstruction of the event. In the scenario, we just followed the battle day by day. So there we go, straight from the horse's mouth. He saw it as a documentary piece. Yeah.
And that is purely what you get when you see the movie. It follows it day by day. You get Stanley Maxted, BBC war correspondent. He goes day 3, day 4, day 5, and it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, he becomes the narrator, doesn't he? But the interesting thing there is the film doesn't have any credits. There's no credits at the beginning or the end of the film. There's just a dedication.
Crawling text, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a dedication to every man who fought at Arnhem. The film is an everlasting memorial to those who gave their lives. That's the introduction.
And the working title was I Fought at Arnhem. Somewhere down the line they changed the name, but you can tell from having that name on set, you're making a very matter-of-fact piece of movie making. You're not sugarcoating anything. You're not making anything up. Matt knows this because he's got the book and I haven't. Enlighten us, Matt.
Yeah, so the producer, Castleton Knight, sent out a memo where he proposed that he'd pay any man who came up with an interesting anecdote, something real, something that actually happened, £5, which is quite a sum at the time.
So it was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was a particularly big bounty. So, he was offering a bonus to any cast member who had been at the battle, who could remember an interesting sort of like everyday occurrence, or something that would add a little bit of realism, a bit of life,
a bit of panache.
He came up with the idea. Obviously when he was speaking to the cast members, and they weren't saying anything particularly interesting, and then all of a sudden one of them remembered something, and they all reeled off a story, and it was it's something that made it into the film.
Yeah.
So there's certain little bits in the film that you can sort of like after you've watched it once or twice, you can spot and think that's a human element. I wonder if that was one of those little stories that was submitted by the cast, and the producers said, that's great, we're going to include that. This film was filmed literally months after the end of the war.
Yeah, 10 months
less than, I don't know. It was filmed in, I noticed in the book, it mentioned that it was filmed on location in the summer and autumn of 45. So we're talking literally like weeks to months here. It's like 6 weeks, 2 months, you know.
Hitler's still fresh in the ground at this point. You know.
Exactly. Well, I mean, at that time, Holland is still suffering from a terrible famine. At that point, you know, the food shortages are still very real at that point. And I think it's the winter of 44 and 45 were particularly hard for the Netherlands.
There's a lovely little website I came across called James Christie's Personal Blog, and his father fought at Arnhem, and then 10 months later he was in the movie, Bob Christie. And me and Matt were saying when we were planning this that did anybody use this film as sort of like an early form of coping with what they did or what they had seen there? And I think his sort of writing, it kind of proves that even if they didn't realize it was doing something for them, it was.
But as you say, Bob Christie is an excellent example, and going back to somewhere where you lost friends and you fought hard to survive must have been, if nothing else, jarring and surreal. To be there, like 10 months later, back on the ground, everything looks the same because the cleanup, I don't know how. Obviously, in the film, you can see that the damages are still very much real, and it looks very much like the battlefield probably looked at the end of September 44.
It looks exactly the same. I mean, because James writes about his dad, or his dad wrote this part of the actual website, but it says the Van Dollendren Laundry after the where his dad was. He goes, "What happened next was a blessing. I now realise there was a sudden clamour up the lane to my right. A middle-aged lady and a girl in her late teens were waving, shouting, crying, laughing all at the same time. The younger ran down towards me, and I recognised her again. The daughter of the Van Dollendren family. Behind her came her mother. I'd spent some hours in the afternoon of the 19th of September 1944 near their house, awaiting the arrival of the rest of my troop from a gun position in the north of Oosterbeek. With them, I'd shared my boiled sweets and dehydrated porridge. They appeared delighted that I had survived the battle." I don't think you're never going to get that on the set of Saving Private Ryan, are you?
And to jump off the comparison to Saving Private Ryan, there, I would say that the battle sequences that are shown in theirs are probably the most realistic that had ever been seen up until that point of World War II. You know, this is all filmed outside. It's all filmed by guys who were professionally trained soldiers at that point. They were veterans. They were
an Army Film and Photographic Unit cameramen, wasn't it, mainly?
You have original footage as well, and that's interspliced within the film, and that's a common element in war films of the period.
Yeah,
I think in theirs they splice things together really well, and it isn't jarring. Like in some films, it'll be jarring, where it'll cut to like a dive bomber.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
You know, there's certain John Wayne movies where, you know, he's storming, I don't know, Okinawa or somewhere like that, or Iwo, and it sort of like cuts to something that was obviously filmed during the battle or during the campaign. If you watch a lot of footage that was filmed during the war by people in the field, then you can kind of spot it by frame rate, grain, shakiness. If you're ever trying to spot this on in a film, they're the characteristics that initially like go, oh wait, hang on, this isn't as smooth as, say, something filmed in a studio. But again, theirs was filmed on location.
Yeah,
it's going to be a little bit more rough and ready than something that was filmed in a studio. Production-wise, the film's really interesting. The cinematography was done by Cecil Montague Pennington Richards, who worked with Hurst throughout his career. He worked on it in Scrooge as well, and numerous other films. So, and he became like a very well-respected cinematographer, and people really did like, especially apparently, they admired his work, and he was headhunted by other directors because his skill was such that, you know, he captured a lot with a little, you know, so to speak.
Yeah, of course. You can tell in this movie, you know, what they're using, what they have.
Yeah.
You know, I say it a lot. You use what you've got, not what you've done, not what you don't.
Well, these are one camera sort of like shots.
Yes, it's got to be. It has to be.
They really adequately put across the atmosphere of the fighting, even when the acting is a little bit stunted, and you know, these men aren't actors.
No, they're not.
There's certain scenes where they're delivering their lines and
they're doing their best.
They're doing their best. Definitely. Yeah. These men are soldiers. They're not trained actors. So it feels a little bit clunky in places.
It can feel a bit slow sometimes, but I don't think that's not their fault.
Not detrimental to the film either.
No, it doesn't. No,
it's just something you pick up on, but you still get the gist of the story. And I don't know. I think for me that adds another interesting element, that these men were willing to tell the story by being actors, something that they've never ever done before.
But then again, you think as well, like, were they used to seeing cameras and stuff during the fighting real or proper? Because, you know, it not a common occurrence for every soldier.
No,
but
definitely not.
For the odd few that saw the glimpse of a combat cameraman or an army film and photographic unit personnel filming them, I think you might not notice for one because they're dressed exactly like you.
Exactly.
And in the heat of battle, you're not really going to be looking. But maybe they're kind of used to it, because there's never a scene where someone looks point blank at the camera, for instance.
No, and I wonder if they had some training. You know, they were.
Yeah, possibly.
They obviously ran through it numerous times.
Yeah, of course.
We've picked a couple of our favourite scenes.
I'll go first, because Matt said I should.
Go for it.
As I've already mentioned, Stanley Maxted does the commentary from day 3 up to the end of the movie. And he was a Canadian war correspondent who was working for the BBC at the time. In the movie, you can tell it's Stanley from the minute you see him, because his beret has a badge with a P on it. So you know it's Stanley Maxted. I'm not quite sure what that P stands for.
Could it be press?
Press. There you go. See? Learn things every day. This is why Matt's on the podcast. He keeps me on the straight and narrow. But so you see Stanley there, and he's got his midget recorder. If you know anything about war correspondent, midget recorders are fantastic, that you can record straight onto vinyl, and then that can get sent off and be played the very same night as you recorded it. And it's the only time I think that it's ever shown in a movie.
I've certainly never seen one before.
But the scene I want to talk about it's a resupply scene, and I think we'll play a little clip from it now.
A moment ago, we heard the engines of heavy aircraft, and now flying low to drop their supplies, I can see over the tops of the trees Sterlings, Halifaxes, Dakotas, and now parachutes are blossoming out like bunches of chrysanthemums. What they dropped to us yesterday mostly went to the enemy, but it wasn't the RAF's fault, bless them. And now they seem, as they leave the aircraft, to be dropping much nearer to us. Some, a few, are even dropping in the ground. All those beautiful parachutes.
Stanley is doing his fantastic sort of broadcasting way of speaking, where he goes, oh, those beautiful Air Force, those wonderful boys of the RAF dropping all the stuff, footage of the Dakotas going down and the Mitchell, I think they're B-25s, going over. And a couple of those Dakotas smash into the ground. And when I saw that footage for the first time, I was like, did they film that? Did they actually film that for the movie? Because if they did, what's the budget? And then you go back and it's stock footage. And it's just amazing footage. It's awesome for the actual meaning of that word before it was bastardized.
And he sort of describes the plane aiming for the German gunners, doesn't he?
Yeah, I listened to the actual reporting from that day. So it's rewritten to be more narrative. Yeah. So his parts of the movie are the only sort of narrative parts. They really help bridge the sort of movie to the next scene. There aren't really scenes in Theirs Is the Glory.
Yeah, it's kind of split day by day, isn't it? but they do sort of jump between certain sort of events that
it flows, doesn't it?
There's a definite flow. So as we mentioned earlier, some of the guys volunteered stories and they make it into the film, and then others are sort of portrayals of events. Like there's the scene where there's a sergeant manning 2 6-pounder anti-tank guns near the end of the film, and it's never explicitly mentioned, but it's quite clearly a reference to Sergeant Baskerville.
And
his VC action.
Actually, interestingly enough, I actually used to live in Burslem, where he was from, and I would walk past that statue.
Oh, he has a statue.
Yeah, it's got a statue of him holding a shell.
Oh, a 6-pounder shell.
Artillery round.
That's cool.
Yeah, I used to walk past it nearly every day.
Anyway, sorry, you carry on about Maxted.
So yeah, he just tells it as he saw it. For me, when I first watched it, that's when you truly know you're watching a sort of documentary piece, especially from a guy who it was his job to witness it. I think that's why it's my favourite parts of the movie, because it adds that layer of authenticity that is there throughout the whole movie. And that's why it's my favourite scene. So, I've talked at length about my favourite scene. So, Matt, please tell us what your favourite scene of theirs is, The Glory is, or favourite scenes.
My favourite scene is one which obviously involves a PIAT.
Oh, 100%.
one of my areas of interest. So when I was researching for the book, as I mentioned, Theirs is the Glory came up as I was writing a section about appearances of the PIAT on film and in popular media, and there are not many. As you would imagine, there are not many. The most famous by far is A Bridge Too Far, and that's not a bad representation of the PIAT. They get quite a few things right, they get some things wrong, but that's the nature of film. By far the very best representation of a PIAT on screen is Theirs Is. There's the very first time we see the PIAT in action is against a Char B, which is a French tank, and obviously to the uninitiated viewer they'd think that's just a tank, but if you're interested in armor, if you're interested in World War II, then you might know that that's not a German tank, that's not a Stug, that's not a Panther, that's not a Panzer. It's a Char B. It's actually correct to the battle. So there were Char Bs at Arnhem, and they were with Panzer Company 224, and they were a training company with the armored. I think it was SS Armored. Was it 9th SS Armored? Anyway, so the Char B was actually present, and it's one of the Char Bs. I think it's a Char B2 that's been converted to a Flammwagen, a Panzerkampfwagen B2. Its main gun's been replaced by a flamethrower. So the first time we see this tank on screen is there's men of the second lift. They're walking towards Arnhem. They're a few miles out. They're walking down a country lane. There's trees on both sides, fields on either side. It's one of those classic sunken lanes that you see on the photographs taken by the Army Film and Photographic Unit. The first thing we see from the Char B, we don't actually see it. We see a jet of flame, and you think, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And the men run for cover either side, and they start opening up, and you get all the way through the film. I noticed on my last watching, there's this constant sound of Sten gunfire. And if you've ever heard like a submachine gun actually fire in person, it's sort of like it's not the crack of a rifle. It's a different sound. There's a certain sound to it, and you can hear in the audio of the film, because I believe they filmed a lot of it with live ammunition.
Yeah, I think they might have.
It sort of sounds like they may have captured the audio live. Not sure, but so to get back to the tank, I've digressed onto some Sten action there.
That's fine. We love Stens. Stens are brilliant.
Everyone loves a Sten. So the men open up with small arms, and then a lad runs up and he throws what I think is probably a number 82 gammon bomb. I
just assumed it was a Mills. I was a bit stupid. I thought it was a Mills bomb.
Yeah, you would assume it was a Mills. Yeah, And I did it first, but I watched it again just before we sat down to talk about it, and I thought, nah, they'd never throw a Mills bomb at a tank. There's no way. And I thought, oh, you know what? That's probably an 82 Gammon bomb. And Gammon was actually a member of the parachute regiment.
Okay.
Yeah, the guy that designed it was a Captain Gammon, and he was a member of the Paras. Fun side fact.
Because it's a meaty grenade.
Gammon bomb's gone in, hasn't knocked the tank out. Be very lucky if it did. Might knock a track off. Who knows?
Mm.
Sergeant comes up and he goes, "Let us have a crack at it with the PIAT, sir."
Can we have a shot at it with the PIAT, sir? Okay, off you go.
The PIAT team, the number 1, number 2, sort of like double off around the flank. The number 1's there with the PIAT, the ready. Number 2 drops down beside him, slams a bomb into the tray, seats it home, and the guy opens up, and it's the best representation of a PIAT in action, because these men clearly knew how it worked. They've been trained on it. They'd probably use it in action. These aren't actors that have been taught how to do it by an armourer, a film armourer. They've sat in training, had the lectures. You know, the sergeants told them how it works. They've probably had a crack at it on the range. They've probably used it in action. It's a great representation of the PIAT. That's one of the best scenes in the film, I think, where they show this PIAT doing what it would have done in the hands of people that knew how it worked and how to use it.
You're a PIAT expert. You know, there's no bones about it. You wrote a bloody book on the thing. Do you think they fired real PIAT rounds at that Shah B?
Well,
from what you know,
I would imagine they were firing real rounds, but I don't know whether they were firing at that Shah B.
That's a shame if they weren't.
There's another scene that I'm going to mention, which is Private Dixon, where he goes off to have a crack at the Panther. It's a great scene.
Oh, it's a great scene. Fantastic. I love it. Both the PIAT scenes in this film are worth the entry price alone. They're just great.
Yeah, well, you've got to remember that the PIAT was a pivotal weapon for the battle and for the Paras.
Every account you read of Arnhem has got a PIAT in there somewhere. You know, I don't know whether the listener knows or not, but when paratroops drop, they don't drop with tanks. They don't drop with 25-pounder anti-tank guns. They don't have that luxury. They drop very lightly.
The other great scene with the PIAT in theirs features Private Frank Dixon, who was with I believe he was with the 21st Independent Para Company, and basically the commander of the 21st Independent is sat lamenting his lack of anti-tank guns, because they've either run out of ammunition or they've been knocked out.
Yeah. And
it's late stages of battle. And he turns to Dixon, who's at the time doing a bit of cooking. He's cooking up some dehydrated porridge or something. I don't know. Dixon pops outside. He puts his cooking down, picks up a PIAT and a 3-round bomb carrier. And he sort of like runs off down the hall, and the house is shaking with shell fire.
Yeah.
Bits of the ceiling are falling down. The door frame's sort of like falling in. Pops outside, uses I think he uses one Panther as cover and then takes on another Panther. In reality, it wasn't a Panther that he took on. I think it was a Mark IV. I think I've seen some accounts that say it was a Stug, but I think it was a Mark IV. Either way, you don't want to be that close to a German armored fighting vehicle.
Going back to the Panther, that was a wreck left from the battle, and it just happened to be in that street. So you can see, just from a historical standpoint, you can see what kind of stuff these lads were going up against with the PIATs. You know, we're not sure from the movie if those couple of Panthers were taken out by anti-tank guns or PIATs, but
they may have broken down. We don't know.
They might have, yeah. Well, I mean, Panthers, you never know, really, do you? But you can really see what the guys were going up against in this movie, for me, a lot more than Bridge Too Far, because... Well,
obviously, in A Bridge Too Far, you get that one scene with the brilliant bridge scene, which is great. That's a really great piece of cinematography. It's an amazing scene. But obviously, later on, you see that one Leopard 2 dressed up as a Panther, or any sort of Panzer, and that's
horrific, isn't it?
It is. It's a shame, and they did the best with what they had. They didn't have the luxury of a running Panther or anything.
They could have just got a Stug. I always wondered, was there not any running Stugs or any running Panzers? It'd just been much easier, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's just Hollywood for you. Just some more favourite things about the film as well. Just from my end, talking about the sort of equipment used. Any people who follow me on Twitter, I posted up. I was watching This Is the Glory a few days ago, and I spotted the number 5 jungle carbine. It's a shortened version of a Lee Enfield number 4, and they were issued to troops in Burma and things like that for a jungle weapon. However, by the end of the war, they were getting issued to the paratroops, and they were getting, lo and behold, the paratroops that were sent to Norway, who had fought at Arnhem, end up with them. So we were talking about getting issued the equipment.
Yeah.
So guys are walking around with the actual kit they probably had in Norway. They probably just put it all up in a kit bag and drove to Holland.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's probably the most likely. I think that the number 5 started being issued to the commandos and the paras in Northwest Europe in early 45. So yeah, I had spotted that. That's a good spot. That's a very good spot.
It's a blink and you'll miss it sort of thing. But the guy walks down a road and it's like a top-down shot of him. And I was like, that's a weird-looking number 4. And then it dawned on me that it was a number 5.
One of the interesting things from the book that we've been sort of taking tidbits from is that during the second lift scene that you see the glider's wings fold in, where it sort of like has a bad landing and the wings fold up. The authors sort of surmised that might have been footage from Varsity because it's foggy.
Okay. Yeah, no, I can see why. I wrote down here in my notes that there's loads of footage of the gliders, and a lot of that footage is cut. But there's a glider that comes down and it breaks in half.
Yes.
It lands nose down. They cut that out.
Yes.
And they cut out a scene of 2 gliders hitting each other and like this breaking apart. Yeah. So for me, I'm like, oh, okay, that's clever editing, because you don't want to show that. No. You don't want to show that those gliders are really flimsy and have a lot of accidents.
You just get that one distant shot of the glider having a bad landing and its wing folding up. That's the only shot you get of.
Really common.
Yeah, I mean they were made out of balsa wood, essentially.
And the pilots that flew them don't get enough recognition.
The glider pilot regiment really does not get enough.
But yeah, it's just another sort of thing that you pick up on like 3rd or 4th viewing. If you know Arnhem footage, it's like, oh, hang on, they're making a conscious choice there not to show something that's negative.
Yeah,
which kind of that kind of now they do it more in movies. They don't mind showing a bit of negativity in hindsight, but for then, I think it's a very conscious choice. You don't want to show that possibly some of these lads might not make it into the battle because they're dropped in wrong, or the pilot makes a wrong turn and they fall, and
Yeah, that's one of the things about the glider pilot, the glider-borne infantry and the glider pilot regiment that people really don't think about. There was just as much, or if not more, danger associated with being glider-borne infantry as there was being a para.
Yeah, definitely.
It takes balls to jump out of an aircraft, but it also takes balls to land in an aircraft with no engines.
Yeah,
it takes balls.
And hope that 2 guys are going to get you down safely.
Yeah, and the vast majority did, and that's an amazing testament to the skill of the glider pilot regiment. Another weapon that I spotted on my most recent viewing of the film was a 2-inch mortar. There's a chap running along with a 2-inch mortar, sort of like tucked under his arm.
Okay.
Doubling along a road, and it's an overhead shot like the one that you spied the number 5. Yeah.
I wonder if that's a little reference to Kane there, because he ends up running around with a 2-inch mortar, doesn't he?
He does, actually. That's a good point. So after his exploits with the PIAT, using it in its light mortar role, he did take on some stugs with a number 2. A 2-inch rather.
Yeah, he was firing it like.
Yeah, almost direct. Yeah.
But yeah, there's all these little sort of tales from Arnhem that we're not kind of sure whether they are or they aren't.
There's hints of things, but
it's sort of, you watch it, every time you watch it, you pick up on something new. For this, I contacted Desmond Hurst fan club on Facebook organisation, and I asked about the budget. They didn't have a number, but there was a guy who does a tours, and he mentions This Is the Glory when he does tours. The guy I was chatting to, and he said someone's watched it 400 times.
Wow.
And they still see new things.
Wow.
If that doesn't sell the movie, I don't know what will.
That's real filmmaking, though, isn't it? You know, that's
Definitely, it really is.
with a cast of probably just under 40 people and a probably relatively limited budget and maybe 1 or 2 cameras and a fairly small crew.
Apparently 120 paratroopers.
Really, that's that many. One interesting thing that we haven't discussed is the lack of enemy in the film.
Yes.
You very rarely see any enemy soldiers in the film.
4 times, maybe, that they're
Yes.
referenced. You only see them maybe twice. You see more dead Germans than you do see live ones.
You do, that's very true. So you get pan shots of a few dead Germans. You get a distant shot of some of them running down the bridge embankment.
That's it. And there's that guy with the Bren acting like he's shooting at them, but not.
Yeah, that's clearly like something they didn't know how they were going to do. And he sort of follows the figures with the muzzle. You can see him moving with them, and he sort of
pulls back a bit as well, like he's
sort of miming that he would probably be firing. And I was kind of sat there thinking, why don't you open up? They're right there. But it's a really interesting scene because that's basically the only time you see any enemy on screen. But there is a scene where you see a German sentry.
Oh yeah, the hospital.
At the hospital, you see a German sentry, and he's got a K98K.
Stick grenades in his belt.
Yeah, he's got like 3 stick grenades in his belt and like 1 in his boot. And he's got some MG 7.92 ammo belt around his neck.
He's decked out and he's ready. He's ready for a scrap. This lad.
Exactly. And you know what? He's a Dutch civilian. They paid to do that.
Oh wow. We thought that it was a squaddy. We thought it was one of the paras. You know, we thought, what poor bastard had that job?
Who pulled the short straw?
Yeah.
Even shorter, it was apparently, according to the book again, the Bible for this particular episode, he was played by a Dutch civilian. So can you imagine what that would have been like for a Dutch civilian who had been occupied for 4 or 5 years to then go, well, I need the money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, the thoughts that must have been going through his head of like putting on an enemy uniform and portraying an occupier. However,
he does, not him, but the character of the sentry gets killed.
Does he?
Yeah, he does. A shell comes in and he kind of falls on the floor, and all the lads, sort of the lads in the hospital, were looking out the window, and they sort of acknowledge the fact he's died.
I missed that.
Yeah. I think he gets blown up.
Ah.
So maybe the thought of being a German, if you get killed, isn't too bad.
Maybe that made it a little bit more palatable.
Because there's no love lost between the Dutch and the Germans.
No, not then anyway. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think you see one German get killed. I think it's like the sniper on the roof.
Yes, from a distance. Yeah,
gets him with the Liam, and you see a guy fall off a roof.
Yeah,
but that's it.
He chucks it up on the wall.
We were talking about whether that was real or not. There's one of the museums in Oosterbeek or Arnhem, I can't remember which one, has a piece of wall that says "No surrender, fuck the Jerrys," and it's got like a little graph, and it's like swastikas.
It definitely doesn't say "fuck the Jerrys" in the film.
No, it does in this picture I found, which I think
it says "no surrender." I know that much, but yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. But that's probably another one of those things that, you know, they said to the producer, well, this is something we did. £5, please.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's part of the thing you were there for a week, you're only meant to be there for 2 days or so.
Mm.
So you've got to alleviate the boredom. And it's the classic humour, isn't it? Gets you through the horror.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And I always like that saying, you know, who's got better humour than the British soldier, you know, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's sections where
the loud Taylor and that's quite funny.
Exactly. And there's also that scene where he's brewing up, he's making tea, and they're under heavy fire. And there's some urgency in some of the other lads in the scene's voice where he's like, here they come. You know, he opens up with a Bren, and he's just carrying on pouring out the tea from his helmet or a tin. And, you know, he's clearly like, he's not paying any attention. I've got to get the brews out first.
Yeah, he's getting it.
I'm not standing to until everyone's had the brew. Okay.
It's great.
You should put that on a t-shirt. I'm not standing to until we've had a brew.
That's great. That's going to be merch. So, we've talked about our favourite scenes. We've given you a little bit of a rundown. So, Matt, is there anything you want to add to our Theirs Is the Glory rundown there?
I just think it's a film that's sort of been lost to the popular consciousness, and every time that you share it with someone, they're always surprised that they haven't heard about it.
Yeah, they are actually.
So there's a number of times where I've shared it with friends who enjoy history, and they've been like, why have I never seen this before? Why hasn't this been on TV? Why have I never heard of this? Why has this never been on my radar? And I think that's a real shame, because the film is not only a great telling of the story, it does the men who fought at the battle justice, just as they hoped it would.
Like I'd never heard of it, and I was doing some Arnhem research, and I came across it, and then it's like genuinely one of my most favourite films.
It's one of the best war films about British troops in action made, definitely. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed us rambling about Theirs Is the Glory, absolutely impeccable war film, which is definitely worth your time and viewership. You can find us over on Twitter at Fighting on Film, and you can also reach us through the hashtag Fighting on Film.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.